Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban from the Lean Blog. This is episode number 35 for January 28th, 2008. Our guest today is David Meier, a former Toyota employee and co-author of the books The Toyota Way Field Book and Toyota Talent. We're going to be talking today about the upcoming books in the Toyota series. We're also going to talk about some of the issues that companies face when they have trouble sustaining lean initiatives 3 or 5 years down the road. So we're going to talk about that, lean culture, all sorts of other good tips for your lean implementation. So I hope you enjoy this, and as always, thanks for listening. So as you mentioned in Toyota Talent, this is really the first in what's going to become a new series of Toyota books. I was wondering if you could tell us about what's coming in the future.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, when we finished up the field book, I think there were a few subjects that either we couldn't go into enough detail on, or that were important enough to maybe warrant further explanation. So the first being that the developing people piece, I just don't think we could devote enough time to that in the field book. And another thing that kind of spawned off of that is this idea of the culture, the kind of human side of the system. So Jeff's working with an organization right now, is a group of Toyota guys that for a book called Toyota Culture, which should be out shortly. I think they're targeting by the end of this year.
Oh, okay.
And then, he and I are going to collaborate again on a book that's called Toyota Process. And, really with that, we want to take a little deeper dive into TPS. I think there's a lot of, more superficial understanding of TPS, but not with some real depth in terms of how to create a production system. And we do want to relate that to non-manufacturing again, with healthcare and maybe some other. I just did some work with higher education folks.
Oh, okay.
So we're really trying to get outside of manufacturing specific, because the concepts apply in other places. But the frustration for us, and I think for a lot of folks, is that there's a lot of effort being put into the lean work, and then I hear people say, and there's a fellow on your blog on one of the bulletin boards a while back said, we've been at this for 5 years, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I hear that comment too often. We've been doing lean for 3 years, 5 years or something, and it's not sustaining, or it's not working, and that sort of thing. So the big question for me is why is that happening? What's missing in the process? And that's what I hope to be able to get into in more detail in the process book. And then if we still have energy left, we're going to do another on problem solving.
Okay.
And I think in the field book we devoted 5 chapters to problem solving because it's important. As I mentioned, to me it's probably the number one skill that I learned at Toyota, most valuable overall. Mm-hmm. Use it for just about everything that I do within the lean process. And again, in the field book we were a little bit limited on space. We went quite a bit over on space and still didn't get in everything that we were supposed to.
Yeah.
And we kind of approached problem solving at the mid-level, what I would call the mid-level. And so we didn't really get into a lot of detail on certain things and practical problem solving. I really want to get into the essence of measurements. How do we collect data and use that data for problem solving? We didn't really get into that too much in the field book. So, I think there's a lot of people out there struggling with that. So again, the idea behind the books is to really look at some of the places where people struggle the most, I think, with the process, or where there's a bigger gap in terms of knowledge,
yeah,
and really try to talk about how to close that gap or how to fill that need.
Yeah. And if you can take a couple minutes, I'd like to delve into that topic when you use the example of saying, well, we've worked with Lean for 3 to 5 years and it didn't work. I don't know if you saw the survey that the Lean Enterprise Institute put out.
No.
Somewhat recently. They put out a survey which I linked to on the blog, and there was a fair amount of discussion about, the LEI has done basically the same survey every year going back a number of years now, and they ask people what are the obstacles to Lean implementation, which at one point it's kind of coming at it from the standpoint of we're implementing this method or we're implementing tools as opposed to maybe the real question would be what are the obstacles to improving your business, but they're asking fair enough what are the obstacles to implementation, and it really struck me as more of a finger pointing exercise because the most popular responses were lack of employee buy-in, lack of supervisor participation, lack of middle management leadership, and the one group that was missing from the survey, if the blame game is even worthwhile, was top management. And as much as even the folks at the LAI talk about you have to have top leadership support, that group was curiously missing from that, and it seemed to me not a particularly helpful exercise to look and say, well, who messed up.
Right.
It's just kind of struck me as a maybe not a particularly lean way of looking at the problem.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that's one of the issues. I think the problem is more fundamental than that. There's always going to be a challenge of quote buy-in and quote support and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So what I've really been looking at is this idea, this question. Well, what is Toyota really doing? What are they really doing? So if we look at San Antonio, for example, and we say, what are they really doing? Well, they're creating this systematic way of driving continuous improvement, and they're not looking at it in the same way that other folks are. They're not looking at it from the standpoint of trying to achieve some specific target. For example, they've had quote lean inventory levels for 20 years. When I worked in plastics in Georgetown, we were 1 hour of work in process away from the assembly line. And so the suppliers in San Antonio are 1 hour of work in process away from the assembly line. The only difference is it's suppliers now, external suppliers instead of internal. So they've compressed that, that value stream from 3 hours worth of work in process to 1 hour. But that's insignificant in terms of improvement. But what it does do, right, what it really does is it forces the folks in that situation to have to train effectively, to have to develop effective standardized work, to make sure that they have a good quality process in place and so forth.
Yeah.
And so from a system standpoint, what Toyota's doing is they're very systematically kind of squeezing that value stream, compressing it, as you say. You can look at different analogies, surfacing the rocks or whatever. And so fundamentally, to me, the finger pointing thing, or it's very easy to do, but I think at the root of it is there isn't a systematic approach to lean that everyone can understand, and the system is what drives the need for change. And that's a key thing in my mind, is that if we need upper management to drive change, for example, we're always going to struggle with that issue. If we need a supervisor to drive change, we're always going to struggle with that issue. If we need operator buy-in, we're going to struggle with that issue, right? But if the system doesn't allow for any other acceptable option, like if you look at what Toyota's created there, honestly, if they wanted to go back to mass manufacturing methods, I don't think they could.
Sure.
I just think that system is so interwoven now that there's no option to even retreat.
Yeah.
Right? And so to me, fundamentally, that's the question, is how do we create this understanding amongst everyone about what's really driving our processes and what are the things that we need to look at and change within those processes? And how do we keep score? You know, how, the whole, again, that whole question of measures, the whole measurement system, you know, is intended in many cases to hold people accountable, you know, or responsible.
Right.
And there's not a whole lot said about how do we inspire people through this process. How do we present people a challenge so that they understand that and so that they're able to, you know, aspire to a higher level of success.
Sure.
You know, rather than just kind of pointing the finger at them and saying, "Hey, you're not responsible and you're not doing what you're supposed to do."
Yeah. I guess that's the leadership challenge, and you know, and why, you know, different companies, you know, all armed with the same toolkit are going to have varying levels of success. And you know, a pet peeve of mine is when I hear people say, you know, lean failed, and I think, well, it seems like it would be more accurate, you know, maybe if, you know, a little bit harsh to say it's not lean that failed, but you know, the organization failed in implementing that methodology, or that organization failed in meeting its objectives, more so than to say, you know, lean didn't work for us, right? I mean, lean's just a concept, really. It can't succeed or fail on its own, right?
Yeah, you know what's kind of funny to me though is I go into organizations and I start with, and I apply the problem-solving methodology from the beginning. You know, first step is define the problem or understand the current situation. So I say, okay, tell me what your business is like. Tell me what the situation is. Tell me what's going on. Tell me why you want to do lean. So, well, you know, we want to do lean because, you know, we're going to get all these benefits. So, well, how are those benefits going to tie back to your business need? You know, why do you want to go out and do setup reduction? And, you know, when I ask that kind of question, I get these kind of odd looks like, well, setup reduction is one of the lean things. It's good, right? And, well, yes, but you know, if you're gonna go out there and make some kind of improvement, it has to be tied to a particular need. Otherwise, it won't stay.
Right. Yeah.
If something's not driving the need for things, then you create a gap or a vacuum. And of course, in nature, vacuums, you know, can't exist, so they have to get filled back in. So what Toyota's doing is they're doing it kind of from the opposite end. They're creating the need by compressing their system.
Right.
And they're sort of driving that. You really do not have an option. You know, I kind of use the analogy and say, well, if I was at Toyota and you know, all of the lines are connected ultimately, and I had a new hire, and you know, I threw them out there on the job and they were struggling to keep up and they were having some issues, and it's fairly typical in other organizations to see that. And the line stops, and everybody shuts down, and all 21 suppliers are stopped, and the Toyota guys are stopped. And suddenly, you know, 50 people come running over there to find out what's going on, and I say, oh, I got a new guy. Yeah, he's a little slow, but he'll catch on before long. That just can't happen.
Right.
You know, it's not even in the realm of possibility that can exist. And so again, the challenge outside of Toyota is that I think most organizations outside of Toyota are not as interconnected, nor will they be as interconnected. So creating that system that sort of drives the urgency or drives the need for that is a different challenge.
Sure.
So I mean, this is in the formative stage. You know, this process book especially is in the formative idea stage. I'm trying to think about how we can translate what Toyota's doing to other organizations in a way that makes sense and in a way that helps them to be successful. And you know, I've used this kind of approach now for the last 3 or 4 years or so with some companies, and you know that the systems approach is successful when the operators come back to you and say, hey, you know what, we'd like to we'd like to measure our progress separately so that we can see how we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when the pull is coming from people, when the supervisors are part of that and they understand, and so it's not a matter of top management driving it or middle management driving it or the people buying in per se, because people will buy it. People want to be successful. I mean, that's back to Deming's, early concepts.
Yeah.
And I believe it's true. People want to go to work. They want to be successful. They want to do things that are going to contribute overall. They just don't always see what those things are. And so we need to create a system that allows folks to see that.
Yeah.
And the measurements need to be timely and relevant, and rather than punitive in nature, they need to be more inspiring in nature.
Yeah.
To offer challenge and things to people. So that's difficult. That ties into Toyota culture. That ties into the no blame, no fault culture that Toyota has to develop. Because if you have blaming in that culture and you're just pointing fingers, then no one will succeed. And in San Antonio, and they're all in it together. They're all 21 of those suppliers and the Toyota guys count on each other.
Yeah.
They're dependent on each other, and one supplier can't point his finger at another supplier and say, well, those guys they're not doing the right thing, because they're all affected by it.
Yeah.
So, Toyota then has to promote this idea of, supporting mutual support, mutual respect, mutual trust, to go back there and work together to try to resolve problems.
Yeah. And those could be big challenges if a company's not used to those ideas being part of their culture.
It's huge. And I think where leadership really does play a role, where top leadership plays a role, is to communicate things consistently and often, to define the message and to communicate that. I don't think they have to be down there beating people to make the process work, but I think they need to communicate over and over again, guys, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're committed to continuous improvement for the long term. And that does not mean that people don't stumble along the way, Sometimes management makes bad decisions. Sometimes people don't do what they're supposed to do. That's all normal, but in terms of the overall process, I'm looking forward. And, management, I had a guy stop me the other day, and he works with a company, he works with a sister company of the one I'm working with, and he says, well, I've been kind of standing on the sidelines to wait and see, because they're pretty famous about starting something and then 9 months later, heading off a different direction. So I've been kind of waiting to see how it's going to go. Now, he's been waiting for 3 years. He said, well, now I can see maybe that it's actually going to stay.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of folks sit. They sit in that, I'll wait and see how this is going to work category, and then at some point finally jump in. So it's a big challenge, Mark. As you well know, you're out there dealing with it every day, and those folks who are out there, dealing with it every day, I kind of feel bad with all the effort and the work that people are putting into it, and really would like to see a higher degree of success. In the USA Today, they quoted a Blaine survey that said only 1 in 5 managers was pleased with their lean results. It was actually 19%.
Yeah.
So that's disappointing with the amount of effort and things that people are putting into the process, that the success rate or the satisfaction level is that low.
Yeah. Well, I hope the new books go well for you and Jeff, and hopefully those will continue having an impact and helping get people down the right path to making sure lean can be successful. Yeah,
and we really appreciate and value the feedback from folks in the field who are trying to make a go of this, and in terms of how we can share information to make it easier. So appreciate your review and your candidness there, and this book, unfortunately, there's a question in Talent Book. Is it too much detail for some folks? I mean, Jeff was kind of concerned about the audience, and I said, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but this is the kind of detail that we need to try to get into so that people can really understand what's going on. And so
yeah, because you're right. Toyota Talent's definitely a different level of detail than the Toyota Way. I think I mentioned to you before I saw it for sale in an airport bookstore, and I thought, well, it's I don't know what the right analogy would be. It's almost like forcing a kid to eat their vegetables. This is important. It might not be as tempting as a big bowl of ice cream, but this is good stuff.
Well, yeah, I think the Toyota Way, when Leica wrote it, I think it does a really good job of explaining the philosophies and concepts of Toyota, and it's a pretty easy read, and the Talent's going to dig into more detail and more specifics, and people may want to glance over that a little bit. So I think your suggestion was appropriate. There's sections of the book talk about organizational development that might be more pertinent to the upper level leaders, and then for the practitioners, the doers out there, there's that they can get into.
Yeah.
So we try to get information to a broader audience, and I think me personally, I'm kind of like a key points guy. The whole idea of the key points really resonated with me.
Right.
It's the how-to part, and that's what I really get into is how do you do this specifically? Give me some detail. Give me the full scoop, so that I can understand it. So that part of it is certainly coming from me. I have a tendency to do that, and so apologize to those folks who want to look at the other stuff. There's some of that in there too, but I think the detail part is to really understand what is Toyota doing. If you find too much detail in the Talent Book, you must know that it probably only went about halfway.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well,
probably realize there's a lot more detail that we could have put in there and didn't just because of that problem.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Don't apologize for that. You mentioned getting feedback. Wanted to have you mention the website that you have set up for the Toyota Way series of books. What is that website again?
Sure. It's www.toyotaway.org.
And I assume that there are some ways through that site that they can interact with you. And
yeah, sure. If people want to send an email, there's a way to contact there. There's some downloads of some of the forms that are available in the book. Just we don't have a lot of information there, but certainly if somebody wants to contact or something, we can try to stay in touch. We would like to in the future update it with more information or things to kind of help people. And I think it's actually thetoyotaway.org.
Okay.
But it's .org, not .com. So.
Okay. I'll make sure the proper link is there.
I appreciate that.
the post for the podcast, if you want to come to leanpodcast.org and click on the link for this podcast episode, we'll make sure that that's tied in there properly. So, and the other thought I was going to give is that again, if people have questions or feedback on this podcast, my website's got information of how you can contact me, and we can try to pass follow-up questions to David, either for maybe answering on the blog or in a future podcast episode.
Yeah, if I could just say one thing too, Mark, about questions. I really don't mind trying to answer questions to folks. So sometimes the questions are more difficult than they might appear. For example, I get this question fairly often and say, well, how would we calculate tack time in this situation where we're running this, this and this product, and that I couldn't really even answer the question correctly because I don't understand enough about the actual situation.
Sure.
And so it's in those cases, it's not that I wouldn't want to answer the question for somebody. It's a matter of this is one of the things people don't understand is that you've got to really look at the total situation and think about it before you can understand how to most effectively, establish something like TAC rate or level schedule or that sort of thing. It takes a fair amount of analysis to make that determination in some situations. And so the only thing I can say is that the questions sometimes appear simple enough, but they're really there's more to it than that.
Yeah. Okay. So don't come looking for easy answers, anybody, right?
Well, yes, yeah. And be careful what you ask for, maybe
too. Okay.
But anyway, appreciate your work there and everything, and we'll try to stay connected.
Okay, and likewise appreciate your writing and continued efforts to help spread the Toyota way. So it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Okay, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.